As a constitutional law attorney, former senior legal advisor, and personal counsel to President Donald J. Trump, Jenna Ellis believes in the rule of law and the importance of integrity in our elections. And she's ready to tackle the big cultural and legal issues facing America. This is the Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of the Jenna Ellis Show. I'm Jenna Ellis, and today I want to talk to you about the 303 creative decision from the U.S. Supreme Court. This was the most important comprehensive free speech case in recent history, if not in the Supreme Court's entire history. And it is so important to break this down because, of course, the mainstream media and the left are using the opportunity of suggesting that because this was a Christian web designer that did not want to use her services to speak content that she fundamentally disagreed with, which, of course, in context was gay marriage, that this decision was somehow anti-gay and the Supreme Court is now anti-gay. That's totally false, and we need to dispel with that myth. This decision was about free speech for everyone, and this was about the importance of the First Amendment that protects any American, regardless of what our viewpoint is, from the government being able to coerce and compel us to speak messages and create content that conflict with our rights of conscience and our sincerely held beliefs, including religion, and not limited just to Christians. This is actually for everyone. So you would think that the left would celebrate this decision and they would say, yay, free speech for all, but they're not doing that. Well, why? I think that's the critical question here, is why does the left not like this opinion? And I think the answer to that is very obvious. The left wants the government on all levels, especially the federal government, to coerce and compel Christians to have to speak pro-LGBTQ messages. So if free speech is for everyone, that necessarily includes Christians. And so that means that now the left cannot forcibly compel Christians to speak their preferred messages. The left never thinks that this opinion is going to be used against them. They never think, well, what if later a Christian wants to compel an LGBTQ person to speak in violation of their political viewpoint or their conscience rights or their opinions? Well, the left never thinks that that's going to happen because Christians don't generally do that. And conservatives understand the limited principles and limited powers of government. So this is generally always one-sided. They want to coerce and compel everyone to conform to their viewpoints, but they don't want freedom to work both ways. So this is an important decision. And I broke this down on the day of the opinion with my very dear friend and pastor, Gino Geraci, out of Colorado. He has his own radio show on the local Salem network called Crosswalk. You can listen to that podcast anywhere that you stream podcasts. So wherever you're streaming this show right now, probably other than Twitter, you can find Gino Geraci's Crosswalk. And so I want to play that interview for you for two reasons. One, because his interview questions were great. We broke this down together. You'll get to hear my opinions on the 303 creative case in the biblical worldview and the constitutional analysis context, but also you'll get to hear from Gino. And I would highly encourage everyone who follows this podcast to also subscribe to Gino's podcast and to listen to him on radio. You can do that web-based, or you can do that if you are in the local Colorado area, because normally he doesn't do the same content that I do here, which is talking about politics and news of the day. He is more focused on the actual substance of scripture and doctrine. And so he'll take questions from callers that talk about interpretation of the Bible, questions about the person of God, and things about the biblical worldview and truth. So it's actually really fun when we can overlap and we say, hey, right now, with this Supreme Court's opinion, looking at freedom, looking at the Constitution, this does, of course, overlap with the biblical worldview. And as all of you who are regular listeners know, everything that goes on in law and politics really does not just intersect, but should be derived from a biblical worldview and the U.S. Constitution that is founded on principles from the Bible. We know that our rights are ordained by God, our creator, and not our government. And it's the sole purpose of government to preserve and protect those rights. And that includes free speech for everyone and the right to disagree. So coming up right after this, my conversation with Gino Geraci on Crosswalk. With inflation, the banking world collapse, and everything that Joe Biden is doing not to protect America, you need to make sure to secure your financial health, especially in retirement. And hey, if you're a millennial like me, that actually is sooner than you think. You need to start now, even if you are a millennial or a Gen Zer, to make sure that your financial health is actually healthy when we get to retirement. And Legacy Precious Metals has a revolutionary new online platform that allows you to invest in gold and silver online in real time. In a few easy steps, you can open an account online, select your metals of choice, and choose to have them stored in a vault or shipped right to your door. You'll have access to a dashboard where you can track your portfolio growth in real time anytime. You'll see transparent pricing on each coin and bar, and this puts you in complete control of your money. The platform is free to sign up for. Visit legacypminvestments.com and open your account and see this new investing platform for yourself. Gold hedges against inflation and against a volatile stock market. A truly diversified portfolio isn't just more stocks and bonds, but different asset classes. This brand new platform allows you to make investments in gold and silver, no matter how small or large, with just a few clicks. Visit legacypm.com to get started. You can download the free investor's guide, and you can also call Legacy PM Investments to talk to a portfolio expert to get expert answers to your to customize your personal portfolio. So visit legacypminvestments.com to get started. Tell them that Jenna sent you.
It's my great privilege to have constitutional attorney Jenna Ellis on the program.
Thanks so much, Gino. It is always a privilege and honor to join you, and especially on a great day like this where the Supreme Court got it right.
Yeah, and when we think about that, I was having a conversation with a friend. It's gotta somewhat warm your constitutional attorney heart that the court has been deciding certain issues in a consistent way that really upholds the Constitution. Now, we can't say that about every decision, but that there's this trajectory of reinforcing. Dare I use the word constitutional sanity?
Yes, and originalism and conservatism are also descriptions that come to mind. And, this is not a Republican versus Democrat issue, or it shouldn't be. This is all about making sure that we all live under a rule of law and that we are a nation of rules and not rulers. And if you look at how leftists have responded to this decision, how a lot of Democrats have responded, their solution is to just change the rules and, we'll pack the court. And they didn't have any of those problems when it was a majority of activists that were willing to go outside the margins and the contours and the boundaries of the rules. And the rules should not mean that Republicans win every time, but that conservatism is upheld in the sense that we are conserving our supreme law of the land. And we have decisions from the Supreme Court that reflect that regardless of who the parties are.
Now, one of the things I wanted to, for many people who, as their pundits across America who are talking about Lori Smith and 303 Creative, obviously for me, Lori Smith is more than just an artist who runs her own design studio. She's a human being who happens to go to Calvary South Denver, who loves the Lord. And so when we're framing this and the Supreme Court issues this victory for free speech and religious liberty, the dissidents, the critics, they see this decision as a blow for the LGBTQ community. What Lori has said, even you, Jenna Ellis, you've said this isn't a blow for the LGBTQ community. If anything, is it wrong to say that this strengthens their rights and privileges under the Constitution?
Absolutely. And to frame this as somehow losing ground for anyone who identifies as LGBTQ today is, I think, intentionally misrepresenting the holding today, because we live in a society where the government cannot compel you or me or anyone who identifies in the LGBT community, for example, from speaking contrary to not only their sincerely held religious beliefs, but their conscience. And so the government cannot reach inside into our minds and tell us what we have to believe. And that is true for me and you as Christians, and that's true for people who choose other worldviews. And so the difference here is that the LGBTQ agenda, and especially in the state of Colorado, under this ridiculously construed anti-discrimination law and the Colorado Civil Rights Division and Commission, they have tried to forcibly compel people who disagree with LGBTQ affiliated people to be forced to speak messages that we disagree with. And so what the left is trying to say is that unless they can force us to buy into their woke religion, then they don't have freedom in this country. That is not what this case stood for. It's saying we have a right to disagree and to disagree publicly. And if you and I want to make the case, and we can and we should, that marriage is between one man and one woman, or that you can't change your gender, or that there are only two genders, and we know the definition of a woman, we should be able to speak without fear of the government not only silencing us or telling us that we have to speak something that we disagree with. And so this is putting everybody on the same playing field and saying that the LGBTQ community does not get to say that woke is the religion of the nation.
You know, it seems to me that Justice Gorsuch really does get right to the heart of the matter with that simple question in his ruling. He says, quote, "Can a state force someone who provides her own expressive services to abandon her conscience and speak its preferred message instead?" The answer by Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson is, as Gorsuch notes, yes, you can if you claim the state is regulating conduct rather than speech, and then he destroys their argument. Do you think the dissent has any kind of legitimate argument, or are they playing a kind of game in this case?
No, the Sotomayor doesn't have an argument, and she didn't have an argument even during oral arguments in this case, which I listened to, that were a little over 2 hours long. And basically what the dissent is trying to do in this instance is to do what activists have always done, which is to manipulate the rules and try to get their preferred outcome instead of being rational, logical, and principled, and simply looking at what the First Amendment plainly says, what it means, and applying that to the case and controversy in front of it. And so what people either refuse to understand or don't understand about the First Amendment is that it doesn't just protect my ability to say something free from the government censoring that or silencing me. But the flip side of that is also protected is that the First Amendment restrains the government from compelling me to speak messages that I disagree with. And so it doesn't matter what the message is, what the medium is, or what in this instance the opposition would say. It's that everyone should have the freedom to speak their beliefs and their conscience and disagree without the government forcing them and compelling them to say something different. I mean, and the Alliance Defending Freedom, who represented this case, Kristen Wagoner, who did a phenomenal job arguing this, she used some of these examples, like, for example, if in the political sphere, a speechwriter were forced to write a speech for a president candidate that they disagreed with, or forced to put up messages on their social media page that they disagreed with, where does that end, and how and on what basis can the government compel us to speak messages that we disagree with? And that's at the heart of this issue. It's not about public accommodation. It's not about conduct. It's not about discrimination against a protected class. This is all about your and my right to be free from the government compelling us to speak against our conscience.
Now, a lot of the facts of this case seem to bear a real close resemblance to Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights, which I know you followed. And the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Jack, who objected to making a custom cake for same-sex couples, but then they gave a very narrow decision. And when we come back, I'm going to ask you about it left some of the free speech questions unanswered. And I guess what I'm going to ask you about is, does this 303 creative case help provide some of the questions that was left unanswered by the Masterpiece Cake Shop case? And does this bode well for Christians in the United States of America? This is Gino Geraci. My guest, Jenna Ellis. As always, it's great to have her. We'll be right back. Hey, I'm talking with constitutional attorney Jenna Ellis, and we're talking about this incredible case, the 303 creative case, and we're going to be tying in a couple of other cases, the Masterpiece Cake Shop earlier decision and some other Supreme Court rulings. But just recently, Jenna Ellis, before I get to that question about the 303 creative case, you just spent a little bit of time coming home to Colorado and participating in the Western Conservative Summit. Did you have fun at the Western Conservative Summit?
I did, and Jeff Hunt and everyone who works with the Centennial Institute, where I'm still a fellow as well, they're very kind to keep me on as a fellow in constitutional law and public policy. His team is always so fantastic, and a special shout out as well to Jamie Erker, who was a former student of mine at CCU when I taught there, and
Wow.
She's doing a great job as one of the main leaders and coordinators there with Centennial Institute.
Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about with the Masterpiece Cake Shop versus the Colorado Civil Rights, the decision seemed very, very narrow. Kennedy was going to focus on the hostility of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission and basically kick the can down the road, so to speak. It seems to me that the 303 creative case, focusing on the free speech questions, broadens what we had hoped would have been done with Jack at Masterpiece Cake Shop. Do you see something significant in this case for people like Jack, like Baronel Stutzman, the florist, like the people who are doing, whether it's flowers, weddings, people of conscience who are saying, look, I just simply want to be a follower of Jesus in the world. I don't want to have to abandon my conscience in order to participate in what I think is the creative expressions that God has given to me. Do you see a kind of a triumph here, a significant triumph that is going to open the door for Christians of conscience?
Absolutely, and I think that you're really wise to point out that this is a much more broad decision, even though it was a 6-3 in 303 Creative and it was 7-2 in Masterpiece.
Right.
Broad, meaning it has a far greater precedent in terms of what the decision actually covers. Masterpiece was very narrow, not by vote, but by what it actually held, and that
Allowed,
was very
yeah.
in terms of the precedent value and just talking about the Colorado Civil Rights Division and specifically showing hostility, as you mentioned, and how they can't show overt hostility to the free exercise of religion, where here in the 303 creative case, this is what we all wanted from the Masterpiece opinion. Back in, I think that one was 2018. And here we have in the 303 creative case, this isn't just about free exercise of religion either. This is about speech. It's about conscience protection. So we don't even have to articulate this as an expression of religion, but simply an expression of conscience. And everyone has conscience rights, and that's what the First Amendment is designed to protect, and why we have a measurable difference even in the text between freedom of speech versus free exercise of religion. Those are two different things, and so for this opinion to cover conscience decisions and speech, I think is very significant. It's a lot more broad, and it is in keeping with the rights that everyone has, regardless of what their religious viewpoint and their expression of their faith and their exercising of their religion is.
And I want to emphasize what the ruling does not mean. For the people who are listening, the ruling does not mean religious liberty provides an excuse to mistreat individuals based on their sexual orientation. And so for the left, paralyzed or terrified that this provides an excuse to mistreat people, that's just simply not true. Am I misreading this?
Right. I mean, there are still public accommodation laws. Like, for example, if a person, regardless of their faith, the color of their skin, their sex, anything else about them that is one of their intrinsic characteristics, comes into a supermarket and wants to buy something off the shelf, they can't be discriminated against on that basis. That's not what this is designed to say and to protect. And so when we're talking about public accommodation, that's a very different body of law and subject matter than the rights of conscience and against the government compelling someone to speak against their right of conscience and their sincerely held religious beliefs. And so this actually is a protection for all. It's free speech for all, not just the Christian, not just the person who wants to exercise their faith in their religion. This actually is for the person as well that wants to have a conversation about gender and to say that they're gender fluid and to have that public debate. This protects the right of the American to freely disagree without the government saying you have to take a position and I'm compelling you to speak contrary to your personal belief.
So do you think this ruling will cause state governments to think twice before attempting to compel the conscience of creative workers or to inflict harm on people of religious faith?
Absolutely. And in fact, there is a law right now out of the state of California that the National Religious Broadcasters Association is suing, and they have a live ongoing lawsuit against that in a similar vein. And so I think for especially the governments that are and tend to be Democrat controlled, that want to censor or, on the flip side, compel specifically Christians and religious speakers, whether that's in a broadcast medium, whether it's on social media, whether it's just expression in a business context like this, this is going to have a big impact. And I would hope that this does cause those state legislators and the governors of blue states as well to think twice before trying to implement that. I think that, like liberals and leftists tend to do, they'll just try to get around the rules some other way. And this is what we saw from several of them that tweeted responses saying, well, now we need to pack the court and, all kinds of other things. Democrats just try to change the rules when they don't like the outcome. But I would hope that with this conservative majority, that the understanding across the country today is that the protections of the Constitution are for everyone. And so states do need to think twice before they try to abridge or infringe upon anyone's conscience rights and speech rights.
The courts, obviously, as incredible as this ruling is, we've seen a series of incredible rulings come down. And the court issued two other landmark rulings striking down affirmative action in schools, declaring the consideration of race in university admissions as unconstitutional, and also the court case. I'm trying to remember the mailman guy, which is the religious freedom issue or religious liberty. In other words, where employers have to now take a good hard look and make reasonable accommodations for people's religious beliefs. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on those as well when we come back. So any initial thoughts on just the whole avalanche of things that have been, you've been inundated this last week.
Yes. Yeah, and just from a 30,000-foot perspective, this is such a significant term from the U.S. Supreme Court. These are great opinions, and this is coming right off the heels of the best opinion in the last term, which was of course, the Dobbs opinion that overturned Roe versus Wade, that was unconstitutional in its inception. So the trajectory of where the court is going back to the Constitution, preserving and protecting the rule of law, is excellent.
Yeah, I'm remembering Justice Roberts' statement, eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it. And powerful. But when we come back, Jenna Ellis is my guest, and as always, providing insightful analysis into what just happened. This is Gino Geraci. Thanks for joining me. Hey, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Joining me is constitutional attorney Jenna Ellis, who, of course, is popular talk show host on her own program on AFR, which is American Family Radio. And if people, so before we go forward, Jenna, people want to know more about you. Where is the best source of information about Jenna Ellis and what's going on in the life of Jenna Ellis?
Well, thank you. Well, definitely not all of the mainstream media headlines or Google. It's what I learned about myself that I never knew when I read some of the headlines. But for accurate and honest information, you can find me at afr.net for anyone who's out of Colorado. Jenna Ellis in the morning from it's 6 to 7 a.m. Mountain Time, but you can always listen to the podcast later. And then I'm also on Salem, thejennaellisshow.com, or anywhere that you stream podcasts.
Now, one of the interesting things that's been going down with the courts, obviously they struck down the affirmative action, declaring the consideration of race in university admissions to be unconstitutional. And according to the Wall Street Journal, the court's ruling against racial preferences means admissions offices must now decide where racial diversity ranks among priorities that can include academic performance, achievement in extracurricular activities, athletics, preferences, alumni, donors. So this, even though they eliminate, quote unquote, admissions based on race, there's probably more to this story than just that. Can you help us understand what just happened?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a great opinion, and this is Students for Fair Admissions versus the President and Fellows of Harvard College. And the holding is that the admissions program at Harvard and also the University of North Carolina violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. This was a great decision that basically repealed affirmative action in college admissions, as you said. But really where I see the outcome of this particular opinion going is really the trajectory of where woke universities are going anyway, which is to say, well, we are going to not have any structured, really measurable merit-based decision. So, for example, for law schools, contemplating getting rid of the LSAT or putting, a much lower threshold or priority or emphasis on a standardized test and looking over a lot of other more subjective criteria. If you follow Sean Davis, I would encourage listeners to, he's a really great writer for The Federalist. I follow his Twitter account as well. He had a really great piece and opinion on all this, basically saying, well, these types of universities are now just going to try to end up with the same result as affirmative action, just in a way that's not measurable like affirmative action, since that has now been declared unconstitutional. So I think once again, because the outcome isn't what the left prefers, they're going to just try to get around this in other ways and not have truly merit-based outcomes in terms of admissions processes. So it's going to be really interesting, I think, where the admissions processes go from here.
Now, once again, Justice Sonia Sotomayor dissented. And in her dissent, she said, the court ignores the dangerous consequences of an America where its leadership does not reflect the diversity of the people. Now, again, that sounds more like a woke statement than a legal argument.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the same reason that the Obergefell opinion that was authored by Justice Kennedy sounded more like a Hallmark card to, the homosexual marriage community than it did a legal opinion, because most of these aren't substantively grounded in legal analysis or constitutional law. What they really are the outcomes that the left prefers. And Justice Thomas wrote a really scathing opinion against Sotomayor in the affirmative action case, and basically condemned everything that she was saying, and also against Justice Jackson as well. And I would encourage everyone to go and read Justice Thomas on this, because his arguments were based substantively in fact and law and in the U.S. Constitution.
Now, the other thing that I wanted to get to is this ruling with the evangelical Christian worker who was denied request to take Sundays off from the post office to observe the Sabbath. Now, again, what was interesting about this case, it was a unanimous decision. It was a unanimous decision. Do you have any thoughts, ideas of what was it about this decision that united both left, dare I say the word right, that they said, no, an employer must show that the burden of granting an accommodation would result in a substantial increased cost, blah, blah, blah. It seems to be a significant victory for religious liberty. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think that the key word here is accommodation, which is something that the left really does prefer. And so when we as Christians talk about religious accommodation, or even the right to exercise our religion in America, we have to remember that that isn't just the Christian faith. That extends to anyone of any faith. And so where I think this probably was something that the left, and even in reading, the opinion of the majority, is that this extends to, for example, Muslims as well. This extends to, any members of any faith who want a religious accommodation that is required under Title VII. And so Title VII requires an employer that denies a religious accommodation to show that the burden of granting that accommodation would result in a substantial increased cost, or some other relation to the conduct of that particular business. And so this, I think, was a much more narrow issue, and actually something that the left and the right can agree on, because this isn't just Christians versus LGBT. This is about any business allowing anyone of any faith to simply have an accommodation. And generally speaking, the left really does like accommodations.
Now, given all of these decisions that have happened, and I know that you were in the thick of it with John MacArthur out in California, and when the state was trying to shut down churches based on the pandemic, and then you entered into the fray also into the vaccine debate. Given these decisions, if those events were to unfold all over again, what would be done differently at this point?
Differently is that Justice Gorsuch and others, but I highlight him in particular because he made it very clear in the HHS case that that ruling on the basis of fear and allowing the government to harness more unilateral power and executive authority just because we fear an uncertain outcome from a threat of something like a pandemic or something else does not override the Constitution. And my belief is he said that 3 years too late. Mm-hmm. So I hope that what we've learned through this is not only that religious freedom requires that the government is not the head of the church, Christ is the head of the church, but also that the U.S. Constitution prevails even in the midst of uncertainty and even in the midst of something like a pandemic. And actually, for listeners who really want to know more about that case, there is an excellent documentary that I'm actually part of, and I'm very grateful to Grace Community Church for doing this. If you want to find out more, it's essentialchurchmovie.com. This is going to be in theaters across the country, July 28th. But The Essential Church is the name of this documentary, and it's talking about exactly this, why it is so important, not just in the context of 2020 and beyond, that Christ is the head of the church and why we have these protected freedoms and liberties as the church, but why this has been true throughout the scope of world history and why at certain seminal moments Christians have stood firm against whatever government system was standing in their way, trying to compel them against what the Bible commands. And it's an excellently produced documentary. And so it's at essentialchurchmovie.com. You can watch the trailer there.
So tell us again where you can watch the trailer.
Essentialchurchmovie.com. And for any pastors that are listening, if you want to have a special showing, you can sign up there as well for a week in advance. But for anyone else listening, if you want to get tickets, then you can get those. Opening weekend is July 28th. And if a theater around you is not holding it, contact them, ask them. We're trying to get this into as many theaters across the nation as possible.
Wow. And I guess in yeah, we got 15 seconds. Dare I keep you for one more segment?
Absolutely. Would love to.
My guest, constitutional attorney Jenna Ellis. It's a great day. It's a great day in America. Hey, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. It's been great having constitutional attorney Jenna Ellis on the program as we've been talking about some of these amazing decisions that have come down from the United States Supreme Court. And, of course, we rejoice with Lori that the court has ruled that Colorado cannot force a Christian, Lori, to create websites celebrating same-sex marriage. But there's a particular comment that he made in his decision I wanted your thoughts on. Gorsuch wrote, quote, "No public accommodations law is immune from the demands of the Constitution."
I love that, and it's so true, and in part just because of the Supremacy Clause, which means that no state has the authority to issue a law or a statute, even one of anti-discrimination, like the state of Colorado, that violates the supreme rule of law, which is our U.S. Constitution. But it also, what he's saying there is direct shade, if I can call it that, against the dissent, to say, this isn't something that is actually an anti-LGBTQ holding. What this is making sure that freedom of speech and freedom of conscience, free exercise of religion, is for everyone.
Yeah, he continues. He says, under Colorado's logic, the government may compel anyone who speaks for pay on a given topic to accept all commissions on the same topic, no matter the underlying message, if the topic somehow implicates a customer's statutorily protected trait. What in the world does that mean?
Yeah. So, well, he's basically saying that the public accommodation law and the anti-discrimination law in Colorado are trying to extend so far as to say that if you basically offend anyone and a business owner says, no, I decline to provide that service, I decline to enter into that contract, then somehow the state can say, no, we are going to compel you to offer your creative skills and talents and your voice and your speech just because someone else is offended. And what Gorsuch is saying is, no, that's unreasonable. It's unconstitutional. And I think that anyone, if they're not viewing this just in a lens of, oh my gosh, this is somehow anti-LGBT, they would agree with that because, again, tolerance, as the left has tried to compel and tried to advocate for, tolerance has to be a two-way street. And if this were an LGBTQ baker, for example, that wanted to decline a service to a Christian, then the left would say, well, absolutely. They should have the right to be free from using their creative skills and talents to write a Christian message. But what we've seen over and over and over again from the left is that tolerance isn't a two-way street and rights are not a two-way street. And so under this premise, this pretext, this guise of public accommodation, what these statutes are trying to do is to forcibly compel specifically Christians, most often, but really anyone who disagrees with the new woke religion of the left, which is LGBTQ critical theory.
Yeah, and again, Gorsuch went on to say that commitment to speech for only some messages and some persons is no commitment at all, and that the opportunity to think for ourselves and to express those thoughts freely is among the most cherished liberties and part of what keeps our republic strong. Isn't that amazing?
So well said. And I love the fact that this is also Justice Gorsuch, who is a resident of Colorado, who served on the 10th Circuit for many years before going on to the Supreme Court. And so I think this literally hits home for him. And so the fact that he was able to write this opinion and be part of this case and part of this majority, I think is really excellent, because more than probably even some of the other justices, he has seen in his own home state the very damaging effects that this has had on the rights of all, at the expense of a so-called right and privilege just for some. And so to express it that way, I think was very apt, and it was incredibly well stated, because the Constitution is for everyone. We are all in this country human beings made in the image of God, have inherent dignity and worth, and the rights that God gave us, as our founders acknowledged in the Declaration, are the rights that government is obligated to preserve and protect for all. And one of those rights is the freedom to speak openly, and the freedom to disagree, and the freedom to have the right to protect our own conscience.
Now, in the just a very few seconds that we have left, your big view of the earlier decision also about the Supreme Court striking down the Biden student loan debt forgiveness plan.
It was excellent, mainly just because, regardless of whether it was student loans, it's a vaccine mandate, it's anything else, the Biden administration has tried to use to legislate through executive fiat, and you can't do that. All legislative authority pursuant to Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution says is given to Congress. All means all. The executive branch cannot legislate. They can't unilaterally cancel student loans. They can't compel a experimental vaccine. They can't do all of these things that the Biden administration is trying to do. That was a great decision. It's in keeping in line with harnessing the stifling the power of the executive branch when they're trying to overreach. So I hope that precedent continues.
See, and again, I'm thinking of all of the usual suspects, Elena Kagan, Sotomayor, Ketanji Brown. They're arguing in the dissent, if memory serves me correctly, that the states that brought the claim had no standing to sue. What is it? Why is the law so uncomfortable with these dissenting justices?
Well, yeah, again, I think that's just a pretext to try to get out of issuing the right opinion. And so when they know that the Constitution is not on their side, they just go to some of these procedural pretexts to get out of an outcome that they don't prefer. And we've seen that time and again. And we actually saw that in Harper versus Moore, which Justice Roberts wrote for the majority, and that one was around the electors clause. And basically, the Supreme Court did not actually have jurisdiction over that case. It was not a case or controversy. It was an advisory opinion. That's not what Article 3 says, and Justice Thomas blasted the majority for that, rightly so, in the dissent. And the only reason that the justices wanted to opine on that is because they wanted to. And they can't do that. And so this then would say we are a nation of rulers in the majority of the 9 justices that just want to opine instead of a nation of rules. And so sometimes even some of the what we would term, right-leaning justices get it wrong when they just want to issue an opinion based on an outcome they prefer. And we should call it out even when it's Justice Roberts, or if it's Justice Gorsuch in the Bostock opinion a couple of years ago that read into the Civil Rights Act and this term of sex, including sexual orientation and gender identity. He was wrong in that opinion. And so we need to call them out, and we also need to make sure that we are always, as Christians first and as conservatives, advocating for our rule of law, not just outcomes that we prefer.
Now, again, in the few seconds left, obviously these are great decisions, but what are your words of encouragement to remain vigilant as these things are? Freedom of conscience, freedom of speech still remain at risk?
Well, as Ronald Reagan said, freedom is only a generation away from extinction. And I would say it's only, in this day and age, it's only one opinion or one election away. And so we have to be the safeguards of our liberty and freedom. We, the people, get to select and prefer our leaders. We have to hold them accountable. We have to be engaged as Christians. We have to promote truth in community, which, as you have very well taught me, is the definition of politics. And we have to be advocates.
Have you ever picked up a towel set because it felt so soft in the store, but then when you leave and you go to use it, it's not really that absorbent? It's basically a towel that is leaving you out to dry. That's why MyPillow has developed the MyPillow towels, towels that actually work. I know, it's totally mind-blowing. Towels that actually dry you. Their 6-piece towel set includes 2 bath towels, 2 hand towels, and 2 washcloths. They come in a variety of colors. I have the sage green and the white. I love them. And right now you can receive a 6-piece set for only $39.98 with promo code Jenna. That's JENNA. So go to mypillow.com right now and click on the radio listeners special. MyPillow products come with a 10-year warranty and have a 60-day money-back guarantee. So to receive this amazing offer on the 6-piece towel set of MyPillow towels, just go to mypillow.com, click on the radio listener special, and enter promo code Jenna, that's JENNA, or call 1-800-564-8475. That's mypillow.com, promo code Jenna.